Now BBC One's Sophie Rayworth with the BBC News at 6.
Tonight at 6, more positive news for the COVID vaccine Britain is pinning its hopes on, though no proof yet that it works. As their trials approach the final stages, researchers in Oxford working with AstraZeneca say the latest data suggests their jab works well on older people.
Our results are really, really encouraging because this means that we might be able to offer protection to the vulnerable age groups, the elderly, who are particularly susceptible to severe disease.
The government has ordered 100 million doses of the vaccine, enough to cover most of the population. Also tonight, a draft report into claims that the Home Secretary Priti Patel had bullied staff concluded this summer that she had broken rules on ministerial behaviour. A woman who had to say goodbye to her dying father through a care home window takes the government to court over protecting elderly residents from COVID. Modernising Britain's defence, the armed forces are given billions of pounds to fund space and cyber projects.
For the kids out there who dream the impossible, do not give up on that dream, because I am living proof that you can manifest your dreams.
Formula One's 7-time world champion Lewis Hamilton on his hopes of inspiring a generation.
Coming up on Sports Day later in the hour on BBC News, who are the winners and losers from the government's £300 million winter rescue package for sports?
Good evening and welcome to the BBC News at 6. There's yet more encouraging news about coronavirus vaccines tonight, this time from researchers in Oxford who are working with the pharmaceutical company AstraZeneca. Britain has ordered 100 million doses of this vaccine. Researchers say trials have so far shown a promising immune response for people in their 60s and 70s. Final data on how well it works should be ready by Christmas. The vaccine is easy to store and cheaper than the ones being developed by Pfizer and Moderna. Here's our medical editor, Fergus Wash.
Yeah, go right in. Hello.
Hi. It is volunteers like Ian from Southampton who are crucial to vaccine trials.
How are you feeling today?
We were there in July when he received the first of 2 doses as part of the Oxford AstraZeneca trial. But we're only finding out today how the over 70s are responding to the jab.
Why did you sign up for the trial?
I've become aware that the side effects of this disease are so much more than just a respiratory illness. And, you know, if I can help, here I am.
The Phase 2 study involved 560 volunteers. 240 were aged 70 or over. They were given 2 injections a month apart. The results showed the COVID vaccine produced a robust immune response across all ages, including the over 70s. Older adults reported fewer side effects, which were in any case generally mild, and included sore arms, fatigue and headaches.
As you get older, your immune system becomes less effective, and that leaves you more vulnerable to infections, and it usually means that you're also less able to respond to vaccines. So our results are really, really encouraging because this means that we might be able to offer protection to the vulnerable age groups, the elderly, who are particularly susceptible to severe disease.
Vaccines work by training the immune system to recognise and remember the enemy. In this case, coronavirus. The Oxford vaccine stimulates the creation of specialist Y-shaped proteins known as neutralising antibodies. In the event of future exposure, these should latch on to the coronavirus and prevent infection. It also stimulates the creation of T cells, another key part of the immune system. These should sweep up after the antibodies and destroy any cells that have become infected.
But we don't know yet whether the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine actually protects against disease. Those vital results from bigger trials are due soon. If it works, there could be 3 effective COVID vaccines coming on stream before Christmas.
We need about 60 to 70% of the population to take up the vaccine. So once these vaccines get approval, it's really important to get the message out that these vaccines are safe, and we do need people to have the vaccine in order that we can start to relax all these social distancing measures in the new year.
AstraZeneca said tonight it has delivered 4 million vials of its vaccine for the UK. The government's ordered 100 million doses, which cost around £3 each. It's cheaper, easier to produce and store than the Pfizer and Moderna vaccines, but they're both more than 90% effective. The hope is the Oxford AstraZeneca jab will work just as well. Fergus Walsh, BBC News.
A draft report into the Home Secretary's conduct concluded that Priti Patel did break the rules on ministers' behaviour, according to sources familiar with the contents. The draft report was completed this summer, but not made public. The Cabinet Office began an inquiry into her conduct after the most senior official at the Home Office, Sir Philip Rutnam, resigned in February. He alleged that staff felt she created fear in the department, and he is suing the Home Office for unfair dismissal. Our political editor, Laura Kuhnsberg, reports.
Good morning.
Good morning.
She's the most powerful woman in the Cabinet, long-standing Brexiteer backer of Boris Johnson. In charge of the police, immigration, one of the most important jobs in the government. Hello. But since February, there's been a shadow hanging over Priti Patel because of this. Dramatic claims made by the man who was her most senior official.
I have received allegations that her conduct has included shouting and swearing, belittling people, making unreasonable and repeated demands, behaviour that created fear and needed some bravery to call out.
He quit, but she wanted to stay. So the government launched an investigation in what really happened. And now, months on, perhaps it's starting to become clear. One source told me the draft report, concluded way back in the summer, says Priti Patel had not met the requirements of the ministerial code to treat civil servants with consideration and respect. And they said the investigation had found some evidence of bullying, even if it was not intentional. Another source said the report was unambiguous, that Priti Patel had broken the code, the rules that are meant to govern how ministers behave. Yet for her part, here at the Home Office, Priti Patel has always firmly denied doing anything wrong.
Are you a workplace bully, Home Secretary?
The reports looked at her behaviour in 3 different departments. And one government source told me it doesn't always give a flattering picture of what Priti Patel encountered. And the man who until recently was by the Prime Minister's side confirmed the findings have been in Boris Johnson's in-tray for a while, but implied that if Priti Patel was found to have broken the rules, she might not have to quit.
The Prime Minister wanted his advice, and the Prime Minister needs to reflect and make a decision. That, as I understand it, is still in train.
The expectation in Westminster tonight is that Ms Patel will face some kind of reprimand, but not be sacked. Yet convention matters. There isn't a single example of a minister who's broken the rules, who's stayed on.
What message does it send if the minister says, well, actually, although I said there'll be no bullying, what I actually meant was, well, a little bit of bullying is okay, and it's not a breach of the ministerial code that requires a resignation. That's not the sort of message I think the Prime Minister, who's also the Minister for the Civil Service, wants to send to those thousands of civil servants.
Priti Patel had to leave government in dramatic circumstances before, departing as soon as she arrived home from a foreign trip. After it emerged, she'd had unauthorised meetings with Israeli politicians. There may not be an exit for her this time, but still an unfolding political drama. And I'm told tonight, Sophie, that the latest version of this report of findings suggests that breaches of the rules may not have been intentional by the Home Secretary. It's important to stress that she has always, all the way through this long-running saga, firmly denied doing anything wrong. But this is a long-running problem for the Prime Minister and exactly what he's going to decide here. It feels like it is reaching a crescendo. All the government will say on the record tonight is that the process is still ongoing, but it may well be at last, after 9 months, that the Prime Minister reveals his verdict on all of this tomorrow.
Our political editor, Laura Kuhnsberg, thank you. The latest government figures show there were 22,915 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period. That means that the average number of new cases reported per day in the last week is now 23,294. 1,744 people have been admitted to hospital on average each day over the last week to last Saturday, and 501 deaths were reported. That's people who died within 28 days of a positive COVID-19 test. It means on average in the past week 407 deaths were announced every day, and it takes the total number of deaths so far across the UK to 53,775. A woman who was forced to say goodbye to her dying father through a care home window is taking the government to court. Dr. Cathy Gardner told the High Court that the failure to introduce adequate measures to protect care home residents from COVID-19 had been one of the most devastating policy failures of recent times. Lawyers for the government argued there was no case to answer, but a judge has decided the case should go to a full hearing. Our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt reports.
As COVID-19 first spread across the country, much of the government's focus was on preventing the NHS from being overwhelmed. Today's case argues the discharge of patients from hospitals to care homes at that time seeded the virus among residents, and ministers should have known they were particularly at risk. 88-year-old Michael Gibson died with coronavirus on April the 3rd, one of the many deaths of care home residents at the start of the pandemic. His daughter is bringing the case. She believes the virus got into his home after an NHS patient who had COVID was moved there.
At the same time that we'd all been told to stay at home, to not see anybody, to keep ourselves safe, the most vulnerable in society, who were just in a larger home, were left not just unprotected, but put at risk.
The case argues that the government failed in its duty to protect vulnerable care home residents. It scrutinises the guidance that was given at the start of the pandemic, including letters like this one from the NHS, which led to the rapid discharge of patients from hospitals into places like care homes. It claims a lack of testing, PPE, and little guidance on isolation policies made it all too easy for the virus to spread. Ministers have always insisted that they acted on the best available evidence.
Right from the start, we've tried to throw a protective ring around our care homes.
At this care home in Kent, they decided to protect their existing residents. They wouldn't take in people from hospitals. The owner, who runs 2 homes, says they were given few details about patients, but were still put under pressure.
There was just no forthcoming information. We then asked further questions. Had they been tested? Would they be tested before they came to us? We just weren't getting any information. So we had to literally, unfortunately, just refuse at that point in time.
But the issue of how the virus got into homes is complicated. In a BBC documentary tonight, one of the researchers who worked on computer modelling to forecast the epidemic says its early advice to government didn't reflect the risk of agency staff moving between care homes.
We didn't know how connected the social care settings were with the community. I'm sure there are lots of academic and policy makers out there that could have told us this if we'd asked them.
And it's the decisions made at difficult times which will be examined at the full hearing of the Gardner case next year. Alison Holt, BBC News.
The fashion chains Peacocks and Jaeger have gone into administration. 4,700 jobs and 500 shops are at risk. It comes after the owner, Edinburgh Woolen Mill Group, failed to find a buyer for both businesses. The Prime Minister says the days of cutting the UK's defence budget are over. Boris Johnson told the House of Commons that Britain's military was the pride of Britain as he announced £16 billion of new money to modernise defence over the next 4 years. The extra money will help fund space and cyber projects. Our defence correspondent Jonathan Beale reports.
Britain's armed forces say they're about to undergo their biggest transformation since the end of the Cold War. It'll inevitably mean less of the old, like tanks and heavy armour, and more of the new to defend in the domains of cyber and space. British troops are already countering threats such as disinformation. They'll also now be part of a new national cyber force ready to carry out offensive cyber operations. And there'll be a new space command with plans to fire the first British rocket, like this US one, to launch their own military satellites.
Stage separation confirmed.
Announcing the biggest increase in defence spending in decades, The Prime Minister said it would help his vision of a global Britain and end an era of retreat.
I've done this in the teeth of the pandemic amid every other demand on our resources, because the defence of the realm and the safety of the British people must come first.
The MOD's annual budget is currently £41 billion a year. The government's now promising that will rise by 4% annually above inflation. So that would see an overall increase in the MOD's budget to nearly £52 billion by 2025. The government says it'll also help revive the economy with up to 40,000 new jobs, with a boost to shipbuilding and the aerospace industry. At BAE Systems in Lancashire, they're already working at what they call the factory of the future on the next generation of fighter jet. Tempest will be designed to fly with or without a pilot in the cockpit. But Defence's gain might mean pain for other government departments.
At the moment, it rather looks as if aid will be cut to help pay for this, which would be a foolish thing to do, because this is part of a grand review of all of our external relationships, including foreign aid and diplomacy and lots of other things too. So to actually reduce foreign aid while increasing defence is the wrong message to send.
Boris Johnson wants to restore Britain's position as the foremost naval power in Europe. But Labour says the Conservatives have already slashed the size of the armed forces, and the MOD still has a black hole in its budget. And even with this extra cash, it'll still have to cut more of the old to fund the new. Jonathan Beale, BBC News.
The time is just after 6:15. Our top story this evening. More positive news for the COVID vaccine Britain is pinning its hopes on. Researchers in Oxford say it produces a strong immune response in older people. And coming up, £300 million to help spectator sports like horse racing survive the winter, but some are left out.
Coming up on Sports Day in the next 15 minutes on BBC News, a huge match coming up at the ATP Tour Finals in London. Rafa Nadal faces Stefanos Tsitsipas. The winner will reach the semi-finals.
Campaigners say they are extremely disappointed after a meeting with the Housing Secretary Robert Jenrick about how to pay for flammable cladding to be removed from tower blocks in the wake of the Grenfell Tower fire. The government set up a £1.6 billion fund to help remove dangerous cladding, but campaigners say it is woefully inadequate, as Sarah Corker's been finding out.
The government has been delaying, it's been procrastinating. They are hoping that another disastrous fire does not break out in one of these blocks.
3 years ago, Ritu found out her tower block in southeast London has the same flammable cladding as Grenfell Tower. The government fund for cladding repairs has been plagued with delays. Ritu's block was the first to have its application accepted, but so far they've received just £50,000. Their estimated repair bill is more than £2 million, while other dangerous buildings may get nothing at all.
It is basically a lottery of, for me, life and death, because we are told that our buildings are as combustible as petrol. And to think that for something that is as important as keeping human beings safe, that the fund would work on a first-come, first-served basis, it's horrendous.
While the government has made good progress with most social housing work completed, it's a different picture for private blocks. There are more than 200 private tower blocks over 18 metres in height with Grenfell-style ACM cladding. Repairs have not started on 75 of those buildings. Of the 83 towers where work has begun, only 4 have had the cladding removed. But this ACM cladding is only part of the problem.
I live on the 8th floor in an unsafe apartment.
Here in Manchester, this development not only has combustible cladding, but other serious fire safety faults that won't be covered by the government scheme. Leaseholders like Alexis face life-changing bills.
We're left in a place of confusion. We don't know how much funding we're getting. We don't know when the work is going to start, if it's going to start. A lot of us have been furloughed, have lost our jobs, have lost our businesses. We have no funds.
Today, campaigners met with the Housing Minister for the first time, but said there was little progress.
We're massively disappointed and just frustrated. The Minister doesn't seem to yet grasp the scale of this crisis. We're talking about a problem that's going to cost $10+ billion to fix, and the money that the government has allocated won't even touch the sides.
We asked the government for an interview. They declined, but said they are providing more than £1 billion to remove unsafe cladding, and that building owners should also address safety issues and meet costs without passing them on to leaseholders wherever possible. But for thousands of flat owners, lockdown has only heightened the feeling of being trapped living in unsafe buildings. Sarah Corker, BBC News.
Rugby, horse racing, tennis and motorsport are all among 11 sports hit hard by coronavirus restrictions that will benefit from a £300 million fund to get them through the winter. But men's professional football won't get any of the government money despite the financial difficulties facing clubs. Our sports editor Dan Rowan reports.
Count of Amazonia, new bolt.
Behind closed doors, the action continued today, from racing at Chelmsford to ATP Tour finals tennis at London's O2 Arena. But with no gate receipts since March, sports have faced an unprecedented financial crisis, and today came a rescue package to help the sector survive the winter.
This specific package alone compares very favourably. We believe it's the most generous single package of any country around the world.
You gave more than 5 times more than that amount to the arts in the summer. What would you say to those who think that's unfair?
Well, first of all, it's worth remembering that we have provided well over £1 billion worth of support for sports already through everything like the job retention scheme, various loan facilities. It is our assessment, working with the sports, to see what they need to compensate them for that.
Sales Sharks preparing for the new season this weekend. Premiership rugby union clubs like this will share £59 million, and for them it's a lifeline.
Well, in principle, I think it's absolutely a necessity. We can't survive, and part of the fabric of everyday life really is playing sport as a hobby. For us, it's professional, but you know, we see what goes back into the community from the professional sports. You know, so really warranted.
11 sports will receive funding, most of it loans. Rugby union's the biggest winner, accounting for almost half of the £300 million bailout. Horse racing gets £40 million, £25 million goes to non-league men's football, with £3 million directed to the women's game. Badminton's delighted to be given £2 million, while £1 million's been set aside for greyhound racing. But men's elite football is missing from the list. The government insists that after spending more than £1 billion in the transfer window, Premier League clubs can afford to support their counterparts in the Football League. A deal is edging closer, and there are even hopes that some fans could be back inside stadia as soon as next month.
There is a chance that in lower risk areas, if we could do it in a safe way, we might at least begin to start the process of seeing fans come back. People could be incentivised to have the test, because if they test negative, they'd have a window to be able to go in and see their home game, see their home side playing. And government would win because we get more people test and we get to see where the disease is.
Today's news is a major result for lots of sport, but for imperilled swimming pools, gyms and community clubs, the future remains uncertain, and demands for grassroots sport to be allowed to reopen from next month is sure to intensify. Dan Rowan, BBC News.
Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon has said she hopes there will be an agreement next week from all 4 UK nations on how to ease coronavirus controls at Christmas. It comes as a BBC survey suggests that Scots have considerably more confidence in the Scottish Government's handling of the pandemic than they have in the UK Government's response, even though Scotland has suffered only a slightly lower death rate than England. Coronavirus also appears to be having an impact on voters' views on whether Scotland should be an independent country, as our Scotland editor, Sarah Smith, reports.
Practicing during a pandemic means finding new outdoor locations. John is a freelance musician who's had a passionate interest in politics ever since, age 17, he cast his first vote in the Scottish independence referendum. He voted then to stay in the UK. He would make a different choice today. So you voted no 6 years ago. Why have you changed your mind since then?
For many reasons, like Brexit, taking away my European Union citizenship,
the handling of the coronavirus pandemic from both governments. Nicola's a really empathetic, compassionate leader and speaks with a real sincerity to everybody. I don't feel that same compassion from Boris at all.
The ancient Mugdock Castle was here when Scotland was an independent country and waits now to see its future. Looking at opinion polls conducted this year, you can see they do suggest an increase in support for Scottish independence, with more than a dozen recent polls finding more people saying they wanted to leave the United Kingdom than to stay. Initially, it was Brexit that reignited the independence debate, but COVID is having an effect too, as voters have seen the Scottish Government making many of the decisions about how to handle the pandemic. A BBC survey asked people who they thought had handled the pandemic well. 74% approved of Nicola Sturgeon's performance. Only 19% think Boris Johnson's done well.
This is certainly the first time in Scottish polling history that we've had polls consistently and regularly putting yes ahead. Doesn't mean to say that they would win any referendum that was held soon, but they certainly look as though they've got a better chance of winning any such referendum than has ever been true in the past.
Yes, it is November in Scotland. These friends swim wild all year round, demonstrating a single-minded determination. But intriguingly, both of them have changed their minds on the question of Scottish independence.
So 6 years ago, I voted to stay in the UK. What would I vote now? I would struggle if there was a referendum anytime soon of how I would vote. I could be persuaded either way, I think. But right now, Brexit is just, I'm not a fan of Brexit.
Brexit matters a lot in this debate, but you can't avoid coronavirus. That's what switched Sheila from a yes to a no voter. She's worried about the cost of COVID, even though she thinks the Scottish Government has done a good job.
They have impressed me that they can manage these sort of disasters or major incidents. So
that doesn't draw you towards thinking we'd be better off if we were independent?
Not necessarily. I think it's something, COVID is so large that we all need to get together.
You worried that Scotland couldn't afford to be independent now?
I think we need to reassess it, yeah.
It is only 6 years since Sheila, Vivian and the rest of Scotland last voted on the independence question. Yet so much has changed. Voters' views are more fluid and the political tide may be on the turn. Sarah Smith, BBC News, Stirlingshire.
The Formula One driver Lewis Hamilton made history at the weekend after he equalled Michael Schumacher's haul of 7 world titles. He's been talking to the BBC's Sally Nugent about his stunning achievement, what it means to him, and how he hopes it will inspire many others.
Britain's most successful ever Formula One driver. The 7-time world champion has achieved a level of sporting success beyond anything even he imagined.
For the kids out there who dream the impossible, do not give up on that dream, because I am living proof that you can manifest your dreams, and even the impossible ones. I remember as a kid, adults, teachers, parents of other drivers and youngsters telling me that I would not make it. You're not good enough. There's no way you're going to make it. Go back to your country. Like all these horrible things. And I remember, I'm going to prove you wrong.
Lots of people here in the UK would like you to be Sir Lewis Hamilton. How much of an honour would that be one day if it came?
Oh, well, like everyone, I've grown up adoring the royal family. And if one day I am honoured to be up in front of the Queen again, I mean, it will be the happiest day ever, obviously, to see her again, because she's an icon. She's such a incredible individual.
Continuing to compete while COVID restrictions are in place has been challenging for the Mercedes driver, but there is one constant in his life. What a fine, handsome dog Roscoe is.
He's the best. I take Roscoe everywhere with me now. I don't really want him to leave my side. I want to maximise every moment I can with him. So he's at all the races. And it's crazy because when I leave in the morning, the motorhome, he's always up depressed when we leave. Come back and he's just, no matter what day you've had is the happiest moment to see your dog. They're just unconditional love, you know.
Soon Hamilton will start talks about a new contract with Mercedes. He will keep driving and look ahead to the possibility of an 8th world title. Sally Nugent, BBC News.
Time now for a look at the weather with Sarah Keith-Lucas.
Thanks, Sophie. Well, we've had a bit of a colder interlude in the weather today, but it's going to be quite a brief window of colder weather with milder air already on the way. This was the scene as the sun set in Inverness a little bit earlier on. There's been a bit of snow over the higher ground of Scotland earlier on today, but through tonight, an east-west split to the forecast. In the west, things will be turning cloudier, milder too, but further east, clearer skies, and there'll be some frost developing too. So we've had a ridge of high pressure with us today. That's getting squeezed away towards the east, and that's allowing weather fronts to start to move in from the Atlantic, bringing that milder air, bringing quite a lot of cloud through this evening and tonight across Northern Ireland, pushing into western fringes of Britain too. And then we'll see some rain moving in from the west later on in the night. But for eastern Scotland and central and eastern England, you keep the clearer skies for longer. So here, the temperatures will fall lowest, and there's likely to be not just a touch of frost, but perhaps the odd icy stretch in the east first thing tomorrow. But tomorrow will be a very different day to today. We've got a change in wind direction, back to those mild southwesterlies, lots of cloud around, and this area of rain pushing west to east gradually through the day. The winds also fairly strong over the next 24 hours or so. Temperatures turning milder in the west, about 12 or 13 in Belfast, but only about 7 degrees in Norwich on Friday. And then heading towards the weekend, we've got low pressure to the north of the UK. We've got this trailing cold front here, so that will bring initially a bit of patchy rain to Northern Ireland and southern Scotland on Saturday morning. That'll sink further south across England and Wales. There'll be more sunshine moving in from the northwest, still a few blustery showers. Further south, fairly cloudy but mild again. Temperatures somewhere between about 9 to 14 degrees on Saturday. By the time we get to Sunday, probably still that cloud lingering in the far south with a few showers, but for most places, a return to some sunnier skies, 1 or 2 blustery showers, particularly in the northwest, but a colder day on Sunday. Sophie.
Sarah, thank you. And that's it from us. Now, the BBC's news team's where you are. Goodbye.